Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our today's CRMKonvo show. Wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, good evening on this lovely world, but on your own screen. In the first short minutes where I met Carmen Raj for the first time, I had the opportunity that a lot of the interesting parts, such as being remote, working remote, being now on a lot of conferences again, if I recollect 12, that is such an amount, which is challenging on the one side, and on the other side, it is room for opportunity to meet people. And that is something which is in our business, analyst relations, analyst thinking, talking to people, checking up, a lot of interesting stuff. So welcome everyone and everybody and everyone. Today we are getting into the messier and more consequential shifts in enterprise software right now. The collision of customer service, contact center, AI, workflow, and CRM into what increasingly looks like a single operation layer. And to help us make sense out of this, we are joined by Cameron Marsh, and he has a certain expertise in that as a senior analyst as Nucleus Research. Cam has a strong focus on business value, operational impact, and ROI. ROI, honestly, is one of my favorites, so I would love to dive into that a bit deeper. Before joining Nucleus, he worked in SaaS on consumer need analysis and applied business solutions, which meant he brought a lot of both as analyst lens and some practical scarf issue to the conversation. And we're looking forward to exchange on what we think and feel and what his thoughts are on this. His recent work has looked closely at customer support technology, Zendesk AI, and the broader shift toward more integrated, operationally grounded system. So he is exactly the right person to help us separate what is actually changing from what is just another shiny vendor storyline, such as where is the vapor there? Where is the shiny wrapping on something not so serious? And how does it play together with all the long-time specialists which are around the corner? Cameron, welcome again.
Good Appreciate it. Good to be here. Thank you.
I didn't see you blush after that.
Listen, I always blush. No, you teed me up great. Hopefully I can live up to that wonderful introduction. Thanks, Ralph.
It's a pleasure. And the parts which were huddles, such as when I had to take some hurdles, were my own ones, because Thomas was so kind and helped me a bit, because we haven't met before, and it is a first experience that we get to know, and I enjoyed very much our pre-starting conversation. But jumping right into it, the eye-opener for me was when the Blue Cloud chaps joined the market with an introduction, which I took not only from Thomas' article, which I read very carefully and at least 3 times to get all the details into my head. It was a stunning point where a lot of people we know very well, from Support Logic, from Zendesk, from Freshworks, from Zoho, from other vendors, and journalists in spectacular and in special, were such reminding positions, such as they were close to Microsoft, they were close to others. SAP had an own branch where they had call center technology working, and Martin Schneider, which is now with Constellation, was for a time being also with Support Logic. And so we learned about, especially in the Corona times, COVID times, that people have not only experienced the people behind an unknown line or on the other side of the screen, that they are just persons you like to talk to because you know you get helped, you get support. But it is also a change in culture. What is your first observation, your first take on that Salesforce is joining here with a certain approach? What was your first reaction?
The first reaction I had is it's a market shift, right? For so long, we've been talking about CCaaS. And with this announcement, we're not necessarily just in the CCaaS market anymore. It's becoming the who
Yeah.
actually fixes the problem market. And that's really nasty place to compete in. I agree with you,
Wow.
but that's what makes it interesting.
And that is a typical Thomas attitude. I'm not interested if it's an AI. I'm not interested how they operate. I just want the heck my problem to be solved fast, effective, and to my liking. So how you do it?
I completely
And
agree. So I guess to jump on that, you said
yeah,
it
please do
exactly
so.
right. The buyer doesn't necessarily care anymore about which vendor provides the prettiest tickets or who can route calls 0.2% faster, right? The question that matters now is when something breaks, who actually fixes it? And potentially more importantly, who gets credit for fixing it? And that's where everything is collapsing. Like you said, Salesforce is saying, we've got the customer, the data, the workflows, and now the agents. Why wouldn't they own resolution? And on the flip side of that, you've got folks like Zendesk coming in and saying, cool, but we see the problem first. We understand intent better and we can resolve it faster, even in your stack. So those are two kind of different approaches to the market. But I think that convergence of what that looks like for customers is changing, and it's changing quickly.
And those would like to benefit from the smartness and intelligence of artificial intelligence. So the real differentiator will be, from my first take and perspective, how good is the in the background relying artificial intelligence and the supportive power for either very knowledgeable human beings operating it or fast learners, which get a lot of assistance. And you have the impression a very knowledgeable lady or gentleman is supporting you, but in reality, it is a smart supporting artificial intelligence, which is helping them to solve your problem fast, which is, from your perspective, I want to get my problem fast, not as relevant as for somebody who just wants to have a nice chat. Yeah. Take that back, because the COVID impression was when we had at these days a lot of conversations with people, which gave us also from the analyses and studies at that time, also from Genesis, that they contact a call center because they needed somebody to talk to. They not had a problem. Now, having that said, it is not to my typical ethical attitude that I get cozy with a supporting organization and co-work, and then suddenly get surprised that somebody is cutting more or less the das Tischtuch, the tablecloth, with a scissor and saying, "Hi, Genesis, now we do it for us, and we know enough how to do it smarter than you. And yes, you may be a bit in the surrounding, but we now would like to take the business onto us." That was something, my perspective on that, which made me a bit nervous. What is your perspective on that one?
I think in this market, nervousness can be a good thing, right? And the reason I say that is it's becoming a fight over systems to a fight over the operating model. And what I mean by that is ultimately the vendors that are going to succeed over the next 6, 12, 18 months are the ones that can go from intent to action the fastest. Now, some components of that is you've got to find a way to do it with clean and usable data. and then not completely break the business in the process, right? Because AI and the introduction of that is kind of exposing the whole game that we play, right? And it turns out that the vendor who owns that resolution are the ones that are going to own the value, not the system of record, not the channel, not even workflow diagrams, the outcome. And right now, I don't think anyone fully owns that loop yet, which is why it's starting to feel a little bit chaotic in the market. That's my take, at least initially.
So what would make a vendor best positioned in order to, well, stay on top of it? Because, I mean, they are coming all from various different angles, right? Zendesk comes from the ticket. Salesforce pretty much too, just that they right now added the voice channel to it, the call center as such. A service now comes from the orchestration. And all of them, of course, they argue to their own strengths, but all of them are somehow needed. So
Yeah.
what makes a vendor well positioned to stay on top of this game as it is collapsing, as you rightfully said?
Yeah. So my bias is going to show a little bit in this answer, right? But I'm not necessarily the type of analyst that cares all too much about vendor positioning and things like that. I care about value delivered. And I care about tangible results, right? So with that in mind, I don't think it necessarily matters what the vendor strategy is. It ultimately, and Ralph mentioned this a little bit, it's the human connection. You know, in every case study we've done over the last 2 years, I was curious about what makes AI successful. So I went back and looked through all the data through customer notes. And one thing I found was every single time someone is succeeding with AI, regardless of the tools, regardless of the strategy, one thing they all had in common was they had a great CSM. They had a great relationship with the vendor. And I think the reason why that's important is this stuff's complicated, right? It doesn't matter how many vendors will push out this message out there that it's easy, it's fast, quick time to value. It sounds great on paper, but as we all know, in practice, it's not that easy, right? It's about what steps do you take to clean your data, to get the foundation right, so all these new and flashy tools can actually deliver on the promises that they're pushing out there.
I know, just putting that into a customer side strategy. Yes, the customer not agrees upon the outcome, wants the outcome. I mean,
Yeah.
Nobody wants a ticket, and if there is a ticket, it better be solved fast. That's good for the customer and the customer's customer. So now, this somehow needs to get orchestrated somehow.
Yeah.
And how can a buyer, so a customer, best set this up that they have success? Because they will be continue to live in a multi-vendor environment. So there will be very likely an ecosystem of ecosystems, if I drift into buzzwords here.
Yeah.
What do I as a buyer, as potentially the CIO or the CXO of Acme company do in order to keep my vendors, well, honest, to put it bluntly?
Well, ultimately, I think it's about identifying whatever that control point might be, right? So in order to assess value of any technology, first you have to identify that control point. In most of these cases, that control point is identifying who actually delivers the outcome. You know, all these layers were built for a world where humans did all the work. You know, systems tracked it and orchestration moved it around, but AI changes that bar, right? So now the question is, can you take an issue from, hey, something broke, to it's fixed, but it has to be fixed faster, cheaper, and with less effort, because that's the value. So to answer your question, what does this look like for customers? Nobody now is buying better routing, right? They're buying fewer problems reaching a human in the first place. And that, I think, is where the market is still catching up a little bit. You know, you guys, I'm sure, see it as well, but vendors are still, in some cases, they're trying to sell on smarter tickets, on better orchestration, more channels. but customers are asking, why is my problem still not getting resolved? Right? If you take a step back and you try to map that, if tickets own the problem, you document it. Great. If the contact center owns it, you're managing the interaction. That's great too. And if orchestration owns it, well, then the work moves faster. But ask a question, what if outcomes own it? Right? And that's where I think the strategies start to come into play. And that's why strategies look different, is vendors have a different ideology on what that outcome should look like. You know, Salesforce is trying to own that full system so nothing breaks on the handoffs. Someone like Zendesk is trying to make resolution happen regardless of the system. But from a customer perspective, none of that matters unless it actually shows up as faster, cheaper, more reliable resolution. And that's the uncomfortable truth, is that the system of record isn't driving the value alone anymore. It's the system that resolves the issue, reduces repeat work, and actually improves over time.
That is an interesting aspect. I would like to dig in a bit more.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, they have one thing in common. They have stinky data, and they do not properly wash it up, clean it, get it in a proper shape. They just start as they are mostly. And what would be your recommendation before you go into that vendor selection process? Either the one with some more AI or with some more speed to solving problems. How important is clean data in your perspective?
I think it's the most important perspective, or most important thing to consider, because ultimately garbage in, garbage out. And I think the thing that makes it very difficult is oftentimes the person who's in charge of AI initiatives and then the folks who make that happen are almost definitely not the same person, right? So I think the one commonality that works across the board for folks who have been successful is taking a step back, being pragmatic, and just think about, what does it take? What is it going to take to get us to where we need to be? Now, if the person who's in charge of making the decision doesn't know the answers to those questions, the ones who succeed are the ones who find the folks internally and ask them their input, right? A lot of this is huge, heavy IT involvement. So make them involved. Make sure you've got your foundation in place. That way, when you start to build, it doesn't crumble immediately.
Now, if I have context, data, more or less unified data, and crappy data in between, in order to keep that clean, consistent data pool is, well, the easiest thing, the best thing to have. Doesn't that favor suite vendors over best of breed vendors?
Yeah. So in general, when we're looking at AI success, the suite still wins in most cases. But the burden of proof has shifted. And what I mean by that is it's not so much that suites automatically win. It's that now the non-suites or the best of breeds have to prove that their extra seam doesn't slow down value. Because with AI, that performance depends on shared context, clean data, seamless execution. And every additional system you add to that stack is just a potential to break that chain, right? Adding integrations, maintenance, coordination overhead. All of these things slow deployment, they increase cost, and ultimately that is what hinders ROI. Really, it's the chinks in the armor, if you will. That is what destroys ROI. That is the biggest reason that I've seen why AI projects haven't been successful.
And how can those best of breed vendors who have their, they have their value, all of them.
For sure, yeah. We'll use Zendesk as an example, right? So when does Zendesk still make sense? Zendesk makes sense when you can clearly articulate the change of the outcome. So if the use case is complex enough that a generalist tool can't handle it, Zendesk wins in that instance. If the value of the extra capabilities outweigh the added cost and time, then Zendesk still makes sense. And ultimately, the organization needs to be able to actually support the integration and also keep it running. The also keep it running is a part that gets overlooked, I think. You know, so many people spend a lot of time, effort getting things up off the ground, and then they neglect the ongoing maintenance required. But if all three of those things are true, Zendesk does still deliver strong returns, for sure.
And how far does Forethought change the game then?
I think in a lot of ways. I mean, ultimately, one of the things that's been surprising about Zendesk over the last couple of years is, you know, in my experiences talking with their executive suite at conferences, a lot of them, when you ask them, where do you see yourself in a year as a vendor, they would give different answers, right? And that's starting to not be true anymore. So they're starting to have an end goal in mind. And it seems like that end goal is to be best of breed, but platform agnostic. Now, that's obviously a pretty lofty goal, right? But at least now the steps they're taking, at least from the outside looking in, seem to actually support that message or support that end goal. I think it's too soon to tell with any degree of certainty, but at least all of their moves now are making logical sense, right?
Yeah, so for me, that was actually a leap in thinking, in vendor thinking, basically, when it comes to not only fixing the stuff, but also making sure that the next fix, well, the next attempt at fixing stuff gets better, which was something that wasn't ingrained so much in, well, neither vendor narratives nor in offerings in general, because, well, it's probably quite hard to do as well. I mean, we are talking about automated process improvement here, which is not exactly a piece of cake. So changing things, but this also goes into knowledge management. Isn't that another overlooked territory in the area of solving issues? I mean, without knowledge, you can't really do that. And as you said, crap in, rubbish out. The most rubbish is probably not in structured data, but in unstructured data.
So I'm going to use actually something that you wrote, Thomas, to answer this. I think you put it perfectly, right? It's the idea of, you know, the intelligence not being a sidecar anymore, right? You know, what vendors actually understand that this context is an intelligent asset and not just a checkbox. And that's a great way to frame it, because if you're a buyer, it doesn't really matter what vendor says they understand that it's an intelligence asset. What matters is, are you getting more value out of every conversation now than you were 6 months ago, right? And what enables that to happen is that clean data, it's the structured data. It's, you know, recognizing where you once were, learning from your mistakes and moving forward. Now, in a perfect world, AI is going to help you learn from those mistakes, right? But it's not magic, right? It still takes effort. It's not waving a magic wand and your problems are solved. I think every vendor under the sun probably wishes that was true, but that's not the case.
They are so similar, and yet they would like to be seen as differentiated, and some of them being just better than the others. Now, almost everyone now has an AI agent studio, and buyers should think about, for their production deployments, for their resolution rates, for their benefit, and for their customers' benefit, and the fallback handling, rather than admiring demo magic tricks. I'm very often surprised as a software selection specialist, and not only as an analyst, what kind of to put it polite, shiny crap I get presented in beauty contests
Polite.
where they want to
Yep.
convince people to make the final decision to buy their solution by knowing that they have not taken a real trouble-making problem of their potential customer. And that matters because the market is entering a phase where the problem is not feature scarcity, it is operational credibility, and it is helping to build and keep your reputation as a professional business partner. What are three proof points CX leaders should demand before believing in one of these shiny presentations and what's written on paper?
Yeah, this is where the market's
Yeah.
grown up a little bit. So clearly, I don't think anyone needs or wants another agent studio. We've got plenty of those, right?
Mm.
But what we don't have enough of is proof that any of this actually works at scale, right? In the case studies that
Wow.
we've done, customers who are actually getting value from AI, simply put, they're asking better questions. So 3 pillars. 1, asking very simply, what are we actually resolving end to end? Good buyers are zeroing in on really it's one thing, and it's percentage of issues that are fully resolved. And they ask that question because they've learned the hard way. That's the only number that matters, right? Everything else is just a way to make average performance look impressive. If your AI tools only work on password resets, that's not real yet, right? The next question that I think people ask, and I think this is a good one, is what happens when this breaks? Not if, when, because it will, right? Customers who have been through this already don't care about perfection. They care about control. Asking questions like, how does this hand off to a human? Does the agent get full context when it does, or do they have to start over? And I personally think this is the most important is, can the users see why AI made the decision that it made, right? If that's breadcrumbs, if it's a little ClickUp box that shows an explanation of why the AI said what it said, that helps customers a ton because it pinpoints where they messed up. Basically, it solves the problem of not knowing what you don't know. So just being able to see why AI is acting and behaving in the way that it is, super important because it shows that they understand that failure handling ultimately is the product, right? And if that portion is weak, everything else falls apart in actual production. Third, and you can feel free to expand on that if you have a different. I'd love to hear your thought too.
Probably before we get into number 3 is that points back to orchestration, what you just said.
Yeah.
So, and well, there are a couple of threads going on in the broader industry beyond whatever solves a problem or whatever solves a ticket, which is that vendors are fighting on, again, vendors are fighting on 2 frontiers or on 2 fronts. Basically, one is the orchestration layer. Who owns the orchestration and thereby makes the other guys a feature of the own layer? The ticket solution, the fast, speedy, efficient ticket solution, which is the outcome for the customer, all of a sudden becomes a feature, a result. And the other one is the access to, well, the gate, be the bouncer for the other vendors that by providing the access to the user and to the end user, to the customer. So what you just said before about making sure that it happens, in how far does that influence the thinking of your customers, the customers that you see and talk to right now versus what the vendors tell that they are doing? I mean, is there an alignment?
I'd say there's a little bit of correlation for sure. But one of the bottlenecks, if you will, is for some reason, and I wish I had the answer to this, but every customer thinks that they've got some sort of secret sauce that makes them better than their competition. And because that exists, some sort of best practice for how does this work from an orchestration standpoint, there's no catch-all best answer to that, right? And that's what makes it so challenging. But I will say that from looking from like the bottom up, right? Starting from a viewpoint of what is the outcome? What is the value being delivered? One of the things I ask folks to at least consider, and again, I'm not the type of analyst that's going to help you figure this out. It's my job to point you in the right direction, then work with people like yourselves to help finish the problem, right? But one thing I'll ask them is identify where those potential issues are, right? Because when we're doing case studies, more often than not, we'll get a sense pretty quickly of something is broken somewhere, right? And usually by the time we're involved, they think it should be working. The customers do, and they're not necessarily aligned with feature to function to value. It's broken somewhere. And again, I'm not the type of analyst it's not my job necessarily to identify where that is. It's my job to figure out, okay, this is delivering suboptimal value. Go talk to some other expert in the field and figure out why that is. And I see that all the time right now.
Yeah, well, this is probably when more often than not the McKinseys and Bostons of this planet get asked, depending on the wallet of the customer, probably too.
Great problem to have for them. I'm sure they're loving it. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all complaining about having too much success. But even though you only point out, only quote unquote, because that's it's a very important job, point out that there is something wrong and how it should be. You surely have an idea on what went wrong regularly, and in your estimation, what are some top reasons or top breakage points?
Yeah, so almost always the first one is people neglect to think about the people cost of AI. And what I mean by that is, does AI deliver change? Yes. But is that financial change going to outweigh the increased cost of that AI? So usage-based cost is one of them. Very recently, won't say the vendor, but they employed it in a sales instance with the idea being, we're going to help our sales guys get more context, close more deals, everyone's happy. Well, the problem is that now you've got a team of 30 salespeople whacking that AI button 10 times a day. And now the usage-based costs, they ran out of tokens in the first week and had nothing to show for it. Yuck, right? That's not ideal. And I think often too about, oh my goodness, it was Klarna, I believe. They tried to replace their entire customer contact center with AI. That lasted 4 or 5 months, and they hired them all back because human agents were cheaper, right? So I think that's the thing people overlook is, does it serve a purpose? Does it work? Yes. But does it financially make sense? Yes or no? And it's that second piece that I think people don't have their eyes far enough downfield when they start their implementation journey.
And unfortunately, none of the vendors is telling this reality story, how things can go south if you do not plan properly and calculate in some human expertise you still need.
Hey, who besides a comedian sells failure stories? Or the competition probably sells failure stories. But I mean, you want to make the deal, so that's well understandable that you are talking about your successes and not the other ones. Do you still remember your point 3?
Yeah, so
that is what I was going to run for.
Yeah. So point 3, and I think this really ties into the feedback looping, right? Is asking a question of, is this AI actually getting better over time? Not is it live, not does it work in a demo, but is it improving? And the customers that we're seeing, obtaining real ROI are tracking things over time, things like resolution rates, things like escalations, faster resolutions on repeat issues. And the way they do that is digging into how that feedback's actually captured, how quickly it feeds back into the system, and how long does it take for these improvements to show up in production? Because ultimately, if your solution isn't improving over time, that's not AI. That's just automation with better branding, right? It's not the same thing.
No,
Very well said.
That's a good one that we should remember, actually.
Yeah, feel free to take that for sure.
Automation with a better branding. That's a good one. Quite the slap, actually, on the hands of some.
I mean, but is it incorrect though?
No,
I don't think so.
Yeah. No,
You nailed it.
Yep, definitely. You're saying that some buyers are deeply looking into ROIs, and are these also amongst the ones that you are talking to, the ones that see more success in their implementations, or is there, let's say, is the ability to measure ROI a lagging indicator, or is it a leading or a lagging indicator of success of any implementation of technology in the call center area?
It is my belief right now that any vendor that claims to have definitive ROI for any AI project is not lying, but is misleading. And the reason I say that is all of the things that vendors are promising, not very many of them have come to fruition yet. And that's where I think the real value is going to be unlocked. So are early wins important? Absolutely. Showing a proof of concept, showing that, not so much what is the ROI, but what's the payback period? If I looked at both of you and said, hey, I'll give you 300% on your money, but it's going to take you 3 years, or I can give you 50% next week, which one sounds more enticing right now? Right. So I think that's more of the shift, is not so much what's the total return. It's when am I getting my money back? Right. There's more pressure to succeed quickly.
Yeah, to me, the ROI question always is tied to the payback period. So I sort of agree. And whether I take the 50% or the 300% or 50% now and the 300% in 2 years depends a bit on whether I'm a Warren Buffett or a day trader. So,
and I think it depends if you're an enterprise or if you're in a smaller company, right? If you're an enterprise, maybe you can afford to wait to 3 years. Smaller folks can't.
Yeah, true. Good point. Yeah.
The SMB driver is a different one than the enterprise driver. I totally agree. And that is what I was missing, that in the story we had outlined from the Blue Cloud, they did not jump on their starter business. It is that they try to get greedy money extra by selling in large enterprises with what they are having and presenting now, to compete to also their former friends and friendly competitors, or running around in the market as well, candidates. And I was wondering what you have had and heard on user stories for smaller companies, what they are looking for if they come to such a decision preparation.
Yeah. Let me think about that one for a second. Because
even 2 or 3, fair enough.
Yeah. The most common, we'll start here and we'll extrapolate, but the most common mistake right now, especially in the SMB market, is overbuying. And you see that clearly when you map it over these vendor segments, right? Buyers will look at vendors like Salesforce, Microsoft, Oracle, and think, that's where we're going, so we should just start there. Problem is, traditionally, those platforms are more built for really strong, heavy cross-functional orchestration, complex government or governance models. And usually those organizations already operate with a pretty high level of process maturity. Now, if you're a buyer and you don't have those things yet, what you're actually buying is what I call an ego tax. You're buying complexity you can't absorb, workflows you can't fully define, and AI capabilities you can't operationalize, which is why you hear the same patterns over and over of long implementations, heavy systems administrators, dependence, and ultimately delayed ROI. A lot of those bottlenecks ultimately result in poor adoption. And if there's one thing that's consistent across every case study, is that low adoption is the absolute murderer of ROI, because the ROI of unused tools is 0%, right? So if you can't drive adoption, you can't drive value, and then it stalls dead in the tracks.
Very well
Now,
said. One of
on
the
the flip side of
arguments-
that, talking SMB market, there's, well, I think that this, to play devil's advocate, that's where the contrast in these vendor groupings really shines, because on the other side, you've got vendors like Zendesk, Freshworks, Zoho, Creatio, and those platforms tend to fare a lot better with faster deployments, lower cost of ownership, easier adoption. So going back to the last example of SMB versus enterprise, folks that are looking at Zoho are of the mindset where we need 50% tomorrow, not 300% 3 years from now. And I think that's where the contrast really shines through.
But now looking at initiatives like Salesforce's Starter Suite, on the outset, they are catering for exactly that, isn't it?
I think in practice and in theory, yeah, for sure. I often think one of Salesforce's, I don't want to call it a shortcoming, but what can introduce bottlenecks is their land and expand strategy, right? I think there's a lot of pressure that customers have told me that they feel from Salesforce to buy more things, do more stuff. And I think that can be dangerous.
So they are not doing enough to alleviate the fear, or actually are doing the other way around, are increasing it.
Yeah, and I think their heart's not in the wrong place, right?
No.
I think what's the reason why Salesforce is so successful is their product is very good. The problem is that I think a lot of customers get, that, ooh, shiny object, chase that, using your words, right? And then they end up in a bug zapper. So that's really the biggest difference, or the biggest bottleneck, is not being persuaded by those flashy, shiny stories. Because although possible, maybe they're not pragmatic. And I think with AI, being pragmatic is probably the most, conservative way to make sure that you don't fail. Now, it's not going to be a complete, total insurance policy, but it'll put you in the right direction.
I totally agree on the aspect that on the one side, the risk of overbuying, and on the other side, not being told what Pandora's box you are going to open. And aside, in the third perspective, that you have some not as, let's say, honest sales representatives which are looking for your favor, but they look for their favor. So here come three components from my end where I get nervous again. And I do not see the honest John strategy by the guys which are promoting Starter if they come in flesh and blood, because the business they drive is online business. And there we come to the point. How can you convince an SMB in online buying such an important game changer for their customers to deliver a better service? Will that work?
As an employee of Nucleus Research, I'm very biased in this answer. However, it is my belief that the best way to convince someone is just validation, right? I think very often, I will even tell folks, like tell end users, if your goal is to get onto a short list, Gartner, Forrester, they're going to be better off in that, aspiration. But if your goal is to actually close deals, I don't think anyone does it better than us, right? ROI case studies are our bread and butter for a reason. I think at the SMB level, specifically, no one wants to be the first guinea pig on the wheel, right? They want to be able to see proven track records of vendors delivering on promises that they make. And ultimately, that's my job to do, right? Is cut through all the marketing noise and figure out what actually moves the needle and what is just a really cool commercial in the Super Bowl, right? That is my job. So with that bias in mind, I think validation is the best way to do that. Now, a lot of vendors are starting to do that. It's the idea of don't sell on feature, don't sell on function, sell on results, sell on value. And I think so many vendors, especially in the SMB market, would be so much better off if they just employed that mentality.
Well said.
Applause, applause, applause. Yes.
I'd add even one on. Is there another way than validation?
Say that again. Sorry, you cut out just a little bit.
I'd like to take one on. So is there another way? You said the best way to do it is validation.
I mean, there's a lot of ways. I think peer-to-peer insights are super important. One of the questions I ask everybody is, how did you arrive to where you're at, right? And one of the answers I'm getting now that I wasn't getting a couple of years ago is, my colleague works for XYZ company. They gave this vendor a look, so I looked at them too, right? I think that human connection, ironically enough, in this world of AI, is what's still driving that needle forward. Because like we've been talking about for the last hour, it's not so much about the technology itself. It's how do you make it work for you and your business? It's technology aligning itself with your business processes and not you changing your business processes to align with the technology.
Relationships.
That ties very well into something that is at our heart. Ralph's more even than mine, far more actually. So, but I bitch around it all the time as well. So currently businesses talk about how many employees or how many agents can I replace with that stuff? Yeah. So which seems to be the utterly wrong question, because as Klarna found out, better not too many. The Salesforce found out the same, right? So they barely managed to keep their CSAT at the same level after reducing their agent force. I just wanted to say force of agents by a significant amount of number, making agents force the force. And as far as I know, in the process of rehiring as well. So how the better question seems to be, so what will become the proper workload distribution between technology and people? And then the meta question to that is how to get there. What can CX leaders, and CX in now the narrow term that is used in the call center and support area, what can these managers, leaders, perhaps do to make sure that first the right question is asked, and then second to how to set themselves up that it works?
Yeah. I don't know if you could be more spot on. At least I agree with you totally. It's so often we get asked, how many agents can we remove? But that's the wrong question. It's what does that human work look like when you take the middle out? And the reason that's dangerous is I think the middle, whatever that might mean for that specific business, was doing a lot more than people gave it credit for. The middle is what resolved ambiguity. That's what stitched together context across the systems. And that's what really compensated for bad knowledge and broken workflows. So AI doesn't remove that work. It exposes you. It shows your hand, right? So what should CX leaders design first? Going back to the knowledge model. right? And that's the reason why. If you're replacing the middle, you've got to replace the middle. You can't just take it away and replace it with nothing. And I think that's what's so often overlooked. You know, dropping AI in the entire process doesn't fix it. It scales it. And that's where the inconsistent answers come from. That's where low automation confidence comes from. That's what low adoption and low ROI come from. So I skirted around your question a little bit, but yeah.
That's only in a proper order, as the conversation should go into different dimensions and directions. And it is absolutely spot on again that things move differently if AI is not willing to walk the extra mile because there is some misfit in your processes. It will only work with that crappy processes. Yeah? It will run along that faster, more precise, more scalable, but it will not fix your problem.
No, and I think one of the problems that I've heard customers allude to often is the idea of a lot of vendors are pushing this idea of upskilling your customer support team. The issue with that is that traditionally customer support is a menial position a lot of times with high turnover rates, and the tribal knowledge doesn't ever exist because turnover is so high. So really what's going to change is what that expert human role actually becomes, right? Because teams aren't seeing real value if they aren't removing humans, right? They're just repositioning them. So instead of agents just clearing tickets, you have to find folks who are going to handle the edge cases that AI can't solve. They're going to need to be able to correct mistakes when the AI does get it wrong, clean up and improve knowledge behind it, shaping workflows so things actually get resolved. So the problem that still exists with all of that, though, is that that's a higher leverage role. And most organizations aren't designed for that yet.
Looking at it a little further, so far we only talked about vendors and their buyers. Now there is a crucial another middle, which is the SI. And well, on the side of the buyer, there's another middle, which is the BPO company. So if I'm looking at this trajectory that we are seeing in the market right now, this converging of various technology and speeding up of processes, there are these SIs and BPOs that make basically their living out of first stitching those systems together and then out of running these processes. So now it looks like that both roles will change considerably. I mean, if there is a well-working system that comes out of the same house, out of the same stable, that is very well integrated, pre-integrated, and just needs to be switched on, then I don't need an SI anymore. Another big if, this system also gives good answers in my support inquiries or my customer support inquiries, I don't need the BPO anymore. So it's a big if, I can repeat that only. If there is, it means there's a lot of change. So who do you see in this overall volatile market shifting will get disrupted or will need to get changed? Will need to change, not get changed, but change fastest. Is it the vendors? Is it the BPOs, maybe the SIs, or ultimately even the customers? Who needs to adopt fastest? Who drives? Who's on the receiving edge?
I think it's realistic to say that 3, 5, 7 years from now that all of them will need to adopt and change. But right now, from my point of view, BPOs are the fastest because most of their models are tied to volume, handle time. And with the early wins that AI is showing, those are being cut first. right?
Mhm.
From there, probably system integrators next, because although, like you said, if we can get to a world where everything comes pre-packaged out of the box and just runs, everyone's stoked, everyone's super happy.
Mhm.
But like you said, that is a massive if. And there's vendors who are trying to make that a reality. But I think it's fair to say that BPOs will probably be alleviated before that becomes reality. And from there, CCaaS probably the slowest, right? They're still owning the infrastructure. Over time, they risk becoming less central. But I think, in the scheme of those three options, CCaaS is probably still going to be the safest for a while. But they're going to need to change eventually. So they're safe for now, but not forever.
So they have time to prepare. Yeah,
I think
whereas
so.
the other ones are already facing the barrel. Hey, looking at the time, so this when an hour is too short.
It really is. I can talk to you guys all day.
It's too short. So we have changed our program a little since for some weeks now. And you are still kind of a guinea pig. Not the first one, but kind of a guinea pig. So we are not ending anymore on famous last words. So means we don't terminate things anymore. We have a lightning round.
Okay.
We have a lightning round of quick question, quick answer. We have 5 of them. Let me start with one.
Okay.
So it pretty much can be answered in one word if you want to. Is AI first service real? Is it pilot theater? Or is it PowerPoint?
That's a great question. Hybrid, right? I say hybrid because I think most organizations, they do have real pain points, automation, QA, whatever that means. But AI first as an operating model is still over marketed a little bit. So there's some truth to that statement, but it's not reality.
Okay. More than one word, but fair.
Yeah, it was more than one word. Sorry.
Which matters more in 2026, Ken? Native architecture or best of breed flexibility? Your perspective, please.
Native architecture.
There we have one word.
Yeah. Do you want me to expand, or is it short and sweet?
Short and sweet. Well, I mean, you may expand, but short and sweet is good. It's called lightning round. Let's make it number 3. There you can be a bit longer. So if you are looking at all those, the whole hour, the whole discussion, the whole framework of this discussion, the whole hour, who has most pressure right now? A Genesis, a Five9 or NICE, or a Salesforce?
I think Salesforce, and mostly because their partner ecosystem is huge, right? So them collapsing the stack with Agentforce, CCaaS, all of that puts more pressure on its own ecosystem, especially those who have routinely relied on filling gaps in service, orchestration, and data. They're going to have the most pressure for sure.
Very interesting. Especially it comes to my mind such as specialist in kicking the ohana somewhere in the end of the body is one of their favorites. They can play with this again soon. Question number 4. What is the more dangerous by mistake, buying too early into agentic AI or waiting too long?
Waiting too long. More importantly, the susceptibility to what I call the opportunity cost of inaction. Fail often, fail fast, because if you're not, your competition's going to. So that fail early, fail often, don't wait too long.
Yeah, but don't fail too expensively.
Fair.
Okay, last but not least. Well, you already said that CCaaS is probably the one that is currently under observation only, or least pressure. But still, will it be CCaaS be a recognizable category in 3-5 years from now, or will it be something totally different?
I think it'll still be recognizable. I don't think it'll disappear, but it won't look standalone anymore. It's a capability embedded into broader customer operation platforms. I envision it becoming more tightly coupled with CRM, data, AI orchestration. So same, but different.
Interesting.
Okay. Let's talk in 3 years again about that one.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Cool stuff. So in another show, I would now have said you have survived the hot seat. Well, thanks. That's been great. It's just been great. So thanks for the insight. So this was, to me, actually one of the harder CRM convos because I needed to think harder. So thanks for that. I blame you for this, Cameron.
You are most welcome, my friend.
You needed to earn the money that I don't get. So thanks again. So next week we are doing something totally different. Then we are looking into the virtues of SEO and GEO relative to CX, whether they are valuable or not. Well, our guest will probably argue in favor of value with Noriko Yokoi, who is deep in that topic, very deep. So I'm looking forward to that one too. Well, and hope that the audience will kick in that day as well. So till then, see you soon.
Take care.